So these are all folks who have participated in our QEP, Quality Enhancement Plan, critical reading, professional development, and been really strong supporters of the QEP of helping to provide more deliberate instruction for their students in critical reading. So thank all of you for being here. We're going to go in the order that folks are listed on the agenda. So Dr. Christy Blevins is going to go first. And Dr. Parrott is going to be the timer. So each presenter has 5 minutes to present an idea. And then we should have about 15 minutes at the end to ask questions, to follow up, to add the things that you forget to say during your presentation. So let me get
There's one. So welcome, and thanks for coming. And at least I'm Christy Blevins. I'm from the School of Justice Studies, and I teach primarily statistics, data analysis, and quantitative type research methods courses. My undergrad courses are typically at least junior level. Most of my classes are senior level. But I find that a lot of our students are scared of math. But I've seen, it's not only at this university, when I was at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, when I was still a grad student up in Cincinnati, I would see that, it's kind of like they're scared of math and they tend to make it harder than it is. In this country, having poor math skills doesn't carry the same stigma as not being able to read or write. So, a lot of people say, oh, I admire you because you can do math, you can do the numbers, but it's okay if I don't know how. I'm just bad at math. And I hear that all the time from students. I've always been bad at math. But, that's not an excuse. But students tend to make it harder than it is. So I found over the years, studies have shown that language proficiency is related to achievement in math classes. And a lot of people don't think about it like that. They think about it being like, oh, well, 2 plus 2 or whatever. You know the formula, you know the numbers to plug in, you go through, you calculate it. But that's not all there is to it. That's important, but what's more important is knowing when to apply what mathematical or quantitative technique and how to interpret it and what it means, how we can use that. Also, textbooks about mathematical techniques are very different than typical textbooks in a lot of ways. They contain more concepts per sentence and paragraph than any other type of text, according to content analyses. Paragraphs are often written very differently. In a traditional text, a non-mathematical text, we have that topic sentence, the main idea at the beginning, and then the rest of the paragraph fills in the gaps. In quantitative type textbooks, sometimes the main idea doesn't come to the end. So we're explaining some details, then the main idea comes at the end. So they have to learn how to read and recognize that topic sentence wherever it is, and recognize the problem, identify the appropriate strategies, and then solve that problem. So they kind of have to, often reread. Sometimes even reading aloud will help, and I tell them that, and I see that in class when we're doing assignments with the statistical software. I'm having them go through stuff, and I'm giving them an assignment. And I don't understand that. So read it out loud. What am I asking? And they're just, again, not taking it for what it actually is. They were making it harder than it was. And also, as with any learning, it's so important for us to remember that learning does not occur in a vacuum. It's very, very important that we remember that it occurs best in a social context, and we need to relate it to the real world, their worlds. So what can we do to help them? First of all, again, a lot of this is just based on trial and error over the years. I found that I need to introduce the key terms. Ideally, I'll be like, okay, we're finished with this class. Now go read the material for next week, and then we'll go over it when you get there. No, that doesn't work for me. I need, in my quantitative classes, to introduce the key terms before they ever start reading. I need to let them know what these key terms are, and again, show them that, hey, don't make this hard. We're going through it from the beginning. So I introduce the key terms, and I show them, hey, some of these define themselves. When it comes to quantitative versus qualitative variables, I say, quantitative, what does that sound like? Quantity, what does that mean? I go through that with them. Variables vary. They can take on different values. There are other terms that they might already know by a different name, like the mean. A lot of students know, an average, but they may not remember that it's called a mean. But there's sometimes that mathematical terms have different definitions than what we typically use. The median, that's the strip in the middle of the highway. Well, it's also the midpoint. So I introduced that. I'll also try to make material relevant by applying it to the real world, not only within justice studies and what they may be doing when they graduate, but also I ask them on the first day of class about themselves. They have to tell me something random about themselves. I had somebody one time that said, I love strawberry Pop-Tarts. I incorporated an example in designing a survey about people's favorite Pop-Tarts. So whether it's dogs or football or whatever, I try to incorporate it. Also, I give these assignments to do as they read. And as they say, where I come from, the yellow sheet of paper, you all happy? I do things like this. Giving them assignments, beginning, just defining terms isn't enough. They need to put things together. So here is just a semantic feature analysis grid that I use. I use these in different material, different terms, but show how things relate. So I got measures of central tendency, their levels of measurement. Also, the last slide that I have, I use these Frayer models. It's an example of probability sampling, where they have to put down not only the definition, but facts about it. Why do we want to use probability sampling? How does it help us? How do we use it? And then examples of techniques, and then non-examples that would fall into the non-probability category. So I find those very helpful. I give those to students. Now, they've got that Frayer model probability sample. They have to do that as they read. The same with the semantic features grid. So those are two techniques that I found that are helpful in getting students to put this stuff together to see how it actually applies. Yes. That's all. Time is up.
That's good. Yes. And Leslie, you don't have a PowerPoint.
I do not have a PowerPoint. My handout is white. Yours is that manila color. Buff, beige, whatever you want to call it. So the topic I've picked that I've used several times in coursework is a purposeful reading assignment. And this past spring, Dr. Mary Ellen Thompson and I used it in a SODL project in all three sections of one of our master's level courses, which is basically the pediatric medical-based course that's pretty intense. And our students read a lot of scholarly literature. We're having them look for evidence-based practices in literature and apply it to the content of the course for children 0 to 21. And so what we developed, you'll see at the bottom, is our kind of adaptation of this original purposeful reading assignment by Van Gyn. And one of the reasons I like it is it follows Bloom's taxonomy. And with these prompts, it should cause students to reread and analyze portions of the text in different ways. So that first prompt, you can decide on the points, but this is the original design by Van Gyn. So the first one is more about facts and description. So you're giving them an article, and then you're asking them to describe the most important aspects. And that's usually what students do first, is they mine for those facts, right? And then they're done. And they want to find that just in the abstract. And I think what I found when I was practicing this, if you're asking them for three most important things, they have to at least get out of the abstract and find some things. So, and then they have those cues of concepts, issues, factual information, and then they have to justify the choice. So it's not just what are the facts of the article. The article is about sensory motor approaches with children 0 to 3. They have to justify what did the author say about it, so they're giving a little bit more information about why they thought those are the most important facts. And then the second section is asking the students to give two aspects of the reading that they don't understand, and then why those confusing aspects may have interfered with their understanding of the article. And what Dr. Thompson and I found is when we did a pre and a post article in our study, we used two different articles, and one was on a quantitative study and the other article was on a qualitative study. And the students really struggled with with describing those differences and finding out why when we made the second article something more intense, a little bit harder to interpret, they had a hard time defining why they didn't understand things. But I think that pushes them farther into the article. Well, why didn't I understand this? Well, here's what I know about statistics, or here's what I know about qualitative studies, and this doesn't make sense to me. But that's what we're asking them, you know, so we're not really grading whether their answers are right or wrong, but if they can make some kind of description of why something interfered with their understanding of the article. And then the third item here is you're asking the students to pose a question to the author. And so we've moved from facts and descriptions to assessment to more of a synthesis. And what we saw in our students, the ones that really are at higher levels of critical reading, they were actually bringing in something they'd already learned in the course, or some reference point from previous courses, some knowledge that where they could relate this article to that, how that could apply. So we went a step further because Dr. Thompson and I had gone through the one of the library courses, and we were really interested in students looking at the author and like the context of the writing of that article. And so we added this fourth requirement, which would explain, asking them to explain why you might trust or not trust the accuracy of the text and the authority of the authors. So those students were able to, the ones that were excelling were explaining some of the research methods, or the talking about sample sizes. Others would notice that maybe it was one author from one university and some grad students, or they would notice that it was an author they were familiar with. They were, a well-known occupational therapist or researcher, and others, so we were asking them to explore that because we want them to know where the information comes from. Just because it's a peer-reviewed article doesn't mean that it's the absolute authority on things. So anyway, I've really found this assignment useful, and Dr. Thompson has even said, she's our graduate coordinator, she's even said she might implement something like this for our GAs, because we use, all of us use our GAs often to find articles to support research that we're doing or things that we're going to start, and we want, if our GAs are helping us do that, we want them to be able to do these steps at a very high level. But I found this to be very useful. We got mixed reviews from the students. In general, they found it very difficult. But we also found when we worked through a lot of critical reading strategies in that project that they improved in all areas, especially the last two, the synthesis and the evaluation. So it would help us determine even a baseline for student skills so we know what we need to work on in a curriculum. So I found this a very useful tool.
Thank you. And Cindy Davis.
Good morning. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Dr. Cindy Hayden, and I teach in the Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy Department in the College of Health Sciences. And our department was part of a planned learning community with Jill and Lisa in the spring of 2017, I believe. And about 2/3 of our department participated in that, and several of us, probably 6 or 7 of us, decided to do a Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, a SOTL project, based out of that learning community. And what I wanted to look at was I wanted to look at a project that tracks students' ability to read scholarly articles through the bachelor's program and into the master's program. And so what I did, and I'll give a plug out to the Instructional Design Center if you have a chance to take their professional development. One summer I was in that course, and I was able to create a video tutorial with their assistance. If you're not familiar with PlayPosit, it's a website where you can import videos and then insert questions right into the videos. But that summer I spent developing a PowerPoint of an article that some of our faculty had written and was published in our national journal, the Occupational Therapy Journal. And I went through the article and recorded a expert critically reading through the article. And most of the students didn't realize that you really are not supposed to read a peer-reviewed article straight through. You scan it first, and so we went through all the steps. and put it on YouTube and then imported it into the PlayPosit. And we collected data on juniors, seniors, master's first year, and master's second year students. And there was a pre and post test MARCI. If you're not familiar with the MARCI, it stands for Metacognitive Awareness of Reading Strategies Inventory. And it's a 30 question Likert type scale where 1 means never, almost never, and 5 means almost or always. And so they did a pre and post test MARCI before they saw the video. There were 15 multiple choice questions embedded in the video. Then there were 8 short answer questions, and they had to do with, the first question was, what are 2 things you want to know about reading a scholarly article? And then the other questions were, what questions do you have about the different sections of a peer-reviewed article? Abstract, introduction, the lit review, the methods section, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, the data collection, data analysis. They had a lot of questions about how to interpret the results of figures in the tables. And then the discussion conclusion sections, and we also talked about the reference sections as well. So my research questions were, would the students note self-improvement in their competence and their competence in critical reading skills, pre and post MARCI test? And I also wanted to look at across the cross-section, were there differences between the juniors, seniors, and master level students in terms of their self-rating. And the MARCI is divided into 3 categories: global reading skills, support reading skills, and problem-solving reading skills. And I also wanted to see if there was any kind of pattern of skill building, looking at the quantitative and qualitative data in reading a discipline-specific research article. I think we made the assumption as faculty that students know how to read a scholarly article, and most of them do not. I even had master's students say, oh, I just thought you read it from the beginning to the end, and their main focus when I looked at the qualitative data was that they wanted to be able to read things quickly and easily, which to me is the exact opposite of critical reading. And so that was an interesting finding. But some of the findings were, this was surprising to me. On one of the problem-solving scales, in particular, it was when texts become difficult, I reread to increase my understanding. They actually had negative changes from the pre-test to the post-test. I did allow a 2 to 3 month lag time. They were in their fall semester when they had the pre-test. They were in the spring semester when they had the post-test. And I did that purposefully. But it was interesting to note that they had a decrease in their score in that problem solving, especially the juniors. And then the global reading and support reading strategies, the scores ranged anywhere from 1 to 5, and so there were lots of like high 2s in some of the global reading strategies and support strategies. Examples of the global reading strategies were, for example, when texts become difficult, I pay closer attention to what I'm reading. So they had low scores at the beginning of these things. Another one for, let's see, global is I check to see if my guesses about the text are right or wrong. For support reading, some of the phrases were I go back and forth in the text to find relationships among ideas. And then some more problem solving where I try to go back on track when I lose concentration. So this was originally developed for high school and college English as a second language students in 2002. But I find with our students, EKU did their QEP on critical thinking at first, and then we swung back around and decided that maybe we needed to go more to the foundational level for this critical reading. So I don't think it's a bad place to start to use this test, even if it was originally designed for more high school students and ESL students. But the scores on their global reading strategies and support reading strategies, relatively large improvements over those 2 subsections. And then overall, if you added up the problem solving, support reading, and the global reading strategies, the junior, seniors, and MS1 students improved their awareness of reading strategies. The MS2 students, there was a problem with data collection. They go out on their level 2 internships, and so they are not on campus anymore. And so the rate of return with their online test scores, I did not end up including them in the study because of about 70 students, there was probably 10 that I got replies on for the post-test, and so We really only looked at the post-test on the juniors, seniors, and master's first year. So what I found, and this is more from the qualitative data, Leslie has actually helped me look at some of this data. We looked at all the responses that they looked at in terms of, what questions they had about the different sections of the articles. And the juniors tend to scan, they tend to read in chunks, and they try to figure out what each section means. They may not have a full understanding of each section of the scholarly article at that level in college, and they try to understand the important parts of it and try to figure out better ways to read it. The seniors were looking more specifically at each section. They were able to break it down better, and they were actually using more metacognitive strategies for critical reading. By the time they got to the master's level, they were reading the research article for understanding, and they were scanning and skimming on the first read, and they realized that was okay. It was okay to do that, and that was actually probably time-wise a better way to do it than to try to parse through the whole article beginning to end. What was very enlightening was that MS students, and I saw this in several of their comments, was that they were already critically reading. They didn't know to call it that, but they felt like they had developed that skill, and they wished that they had that video tutorial earlier in the program. They wouldn't quite have struggled so much with some of the article assignments in the courses. So what I came away with is some recommendations, I guess, for teaching critical reading and how to read a scholarly article. And I think we have to create opportunities in our courses and in our disciplines. If you're not in Gen Ed, if you're not in College of Arts and Sciences, we're all in specific disciplines. And each discipline may have literature that's specific to what they do. And there may be a certain way that a clinician or an expert faculty person would go through and do that reading and what to hone in on and what not. And so I think we model that for them, that's an important skill instead of having the expectation that they already know how to do it. And then I think we have to design our assignments so that we know they're actually reading. So have a pre-class quiz, or have a product where they bring to class that demonstrates, yes, I actually read this critically, so I'm ready for a discussion in class. And then in terms of a research paper, I think we're looking at how we restructure our papers so that, especially maybe in the earlier years in the program, that it's more about process and them learning how to do the process than it is about the final product. And then by the time they get to the end of their master's program, it can be more about the product because they all have mastered the process.
Sarah.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Clara. I'm in the psychology department. Oh, I just have one. I need to pass. Okay, so I participated in the PLC, and one thing I noticed is that there were a lot of things going around, right? Like when we talk about critical reading, there is strategies, competencies, tasks, products, right, like essays, or there were a lot of different things going on, but most of them referred to the same things, but it wasn't clear to me what was what. So I decided to go back to basics and focus on behaviors, right? Like what do we want students doing? And in order to do that, I kind of phrase it with verbs, right? So things like skimming, reading out loud, choosing keywords, analyzing, specific behaviors that we want students to do. So this is not a comprehensive list, but I did my best to include all of the behaviors that a good critical reader should be achieving. And then I organized them somewhat from simplest, and this is we can debate a long day about these topics, but from like early on, right, like pre-reading, previewing, reviewing, to more complex types of analysis, like synthesizing or applying the text. So once I have all of these organized, the research questions came about. So an important thing, even though my title says survey, I haven't actually done the survey yet. This is a pitch, so when you receive a link about a survey about faculty critical reading, please go ahead and answer those questions because we'll really appreciate having data, right? So the first question that came about is, what do teachers want students doing? So I have all of this list of all of these different tasks, and obviously you cannot do everything all at once, and it has to be, even from a developmental point of view, maybe freshmen should be doing some things, and seniors should be doing different things, right? Or it can be discipline specific. In some disciplines you might focus on figures, and in other disciplines you may want to focus on key terms, right? So the first question is, what do teachers want students to be doing? And the second question is, does this vary? Is this discipline specific? Do different departments want their students to do different things? Or is just a preference at the faculty, like at the person level, where some teachers like some things, some teachers like different things? So those are two of the research questions. And then the last research question I have is, if you think one of these tasks is important, how much time do you actually spend in your classes modeling these behaviors, right? So those are the type of research questions I'm gonna be asking in this survey that I hope all of you will take when you receive the link. So another final thought I have about these issues, we are also, in addition of the actual what you do, we've been discussing a lot in our department, I'm in the psychology department, about motivation, right? How to motivate the students to read. So in this survey, I'll probably also include some questions about how do you motivate your students, or do you feel your students are motivated, or are you motivated to model all these critical reading strategies? So the goal here is for us to get a picture of what do people want, what do faculty want students to be doing in terms of critical reading, how much of that is already happening or not happening, and also see, because from the psychology disciplines, we have some ideas of what is better than other things, right? So for example, from a learning perspective, things like highlighting and rereading may not be as effective as other things like elaborating beyond the text, right? So we have some research from learning research that shows us those things. So if a lot of the students are doing things like highlighting or rereading, maybe there is room for improvement there, on to emphasize on faculty. Let's move on into the other topics, right? So all of that will give us hopefully a really good picture of what faculty want, of whether this is discipline specific or not, and also how the QEP can intervene more effectively to really target the type of critical reading behaviors that are more needed for students to learn better and to remember their materials better.
Hi, my name is Judy Jenkins. I'm in the chemistry department, and ever since I first heard about the QEP, I've started thinking about how to help students read textbooks more effectively, and chemistry textbooks specifically. So some of these things might be applicable to scholarly articles, but I found that often students in chemistry just read for completion. I've allowed my eyes to see everything on these pages, therefore I have read them, which is not at all useful, really. And so in the first QEP workshop I went to, Jill talked about previewing, and I started using that almost immediately, where I would introduce my students to the structure of a chemistry textbook, show them the headings and the figures and the problems and all of those sorts of things, just to orient them, and also cause them to actively open the book in my presence, so I know they've at least opened it once and that it can be done and it's not actually that difficult. I found that works really, really well with my younger students, my newer learners, so in the first 2 years especially, just giving them some handles to navigate the text is really helpful. But this fall, with some juniors and seniors I've been working with, I tried the same thing, and then after their first test, I give them exam wrappers and say, what could I do to support you better as you learn? And several of them said things like, give us resources beyond the text. We need more resources. And I'm like, that's an interesting statement, because if one had read the text, one might have done differently in exam situations. And so I started thinking about how to sort of up the ante on previewing to better address the needs of the sort of older learners, I guess, more chemistry. And so the strategies that I've been using with younger students are here. So just saying things like, look at this example. Yeah, so you have a handout that looks just like this. So saying, look at these practice problems, take a look at these, don't worry about other things. And those all had worked well with my younger students, but with the sort of older learners, I've been trying something that we're all calling focus on the figures just because we like the alliteration. And so what I have here is actually the first activity that I did with the students in my juniors and senior level class. And so this is a figure out of their textbook and it's captioned. And it's from the very first chapter and it's review of materials they should have learned in other courses and things like that. And so to those of you that are not chemists, this might look strange, but it's something that they had at least seen. And so then I asked them in groups to answer the questions that are listed there. What actually is this figure? What information was used to build the figure? And what do I have to understand for this figure to be meaningful? And not surprisingly, we struggled a lot to answer those questions in class. And so then I challenged them with the statement in big bold letters and just saying that if you can't answer those questions, then you haven't actually read the text. You haven't interacted with it in a meaningful way to take things away from that. And then following it up with, if you can't do those things, how do you go forward? How do you actually apply and analyze those? And so after we really struggled with this, I took the whole next class period to workshop figures in the chapter that we were currently working on. And so I took the figure and caption and had them sort of in stations go around and explain them to each other and ask questions about them. And so I just wanted to give some examples of those for those of you that are in science-based classes. And so we think about having different types of figures. And so one of the really common types of figures that you would see would be data that is plotted or charted somehow. And so the questions that I would ask them to answer were to explain the axes, talk about what the straight lines mean, and then relate trends to figures. And so that was one approach that I had them. And so going forward, I can now use these as previewing strategies, right? So when I say, read this next section, be sure you answer the data questions about these figures. Another thing that we see a lot of in chemistry are sort of images or cartoons. And some of these images, this is of p orbitals, atomic orbitals, those are actually computed figures, but some are also true cartoons, and being able to distinguish between those is important. What do the colors mean? What do the axes mean? All of those sorts of things. Let's see if I have another one of those. This is another example of sort of data and cartoon on top of each other, and I hope that even if the content is not particularly understandable, the density is apparent, right? Like that we're trying to communicate lots of things through figures like these. And so asking students, what does it mean to compare, contrast different figures in your text? And so we've been working on those. So those are the three sort of broad categories that we've been looking at, and haven't thought through ways to study that just yet at this point, but it's something that's been really interesting in class I'm doing this semester, and I wanted to share it with you.
It's going to be interesting. I'm going to let you hit play when it's time. All right, I'm Trina Napier with the Knoll Studio and EKU Libraries. I'm kind of focusing on something I'm doing with the libraries right now in relation to the QEP. And basically, we kind of came to a realization, especially in English 102, that students have difficulty selecting texts and understanding that the research process is an exploration of their topic as opposed to just a type in some words, click this button, I'm going to take the first 10 things that are here, relevant or not, and I'm going to move on with my life. So we decided that in order for them to understand searching as strategic exploration, which is your first handout, they needed to understand that the database results screen is a text in and of itself, and that they need to engage with it on a deeper level and read it. So we kind of approached this with several sessions. I'm going to give you a snapshot of one. And so we kind of took an approach of modeling for the students, connecting to prior knowledge with the database screen, and then kind of repetition too, both in person and through flipping a little bit. And so what I'm showing you right now is the flipped portion. I'm showing you a little bit of a video that introduces students to how to engage with the database screen as a text. So. Oh, there is no sound. Oh, sorry, there is no sound. Oh, it's muted.
It's
Okay.
muted on your.
It's muted on the computer.
I'm not sure I have it picked up though. I didn't realize there was sound.
I'm so sorry.
But it is muted on my computer. Let's see if it works.
I could have warned you.
Not hooked up to the speaker. Can you hear us? Yeah,
I can talk through it
through
instead of
yeah.
this, so you can go ahead and stop it.
About that.
So this video I created with Dr. Jill Parrott, Nicole Montgomery in the library, Kevin Jones, and Clay Howard in the library. So what happens in this video is Nicole approaches the database screen and first makes a connection back to something the student already knows about. Like I usually search Google. Here are the differences I notice between the database screen and a Google search. And so this is what it tells me about what I need to do, which is I need to approach my topic a different way. I need to think about it a different way. And then she gets into actually using the database and reacting to what she's seeing. So it's like, oh, I'm interested in service dogs and PTSD. When I type in service dogs, oh, look, the database is throwing up some extra suggestions. Those look interesting. Maybe I should choose them. What's going to happen if I do? And then the same thing with PTSD. And then the video moves on into the results screen itself. And I'm clearly quicker than the video. But that's good. I think we've actually stopped it. So no, that's fine. And as the results screen comes up, the narrator looks at the results, narrows in on titles, talks through titles, talks about like, oh, this is a really long title, but the words, individual words, I understand this one, I don't understand that one. Notices that the search terms that she used are in bold in the titles and in the subject headings. Makes a connection to what subject headings are and how they might be useful, and then starts looking at, if you have used an EBSCOhost database, you know you have a set of limiters on the left side of the page. So she looks at that left side and says, okay, well, it's using terminology like limit to. What would limit to mean if I chose an option under limit to? What would that do? And then also makes a connection back to something that she's already familiar with. So she says, when I shop on Amazon, I know that those things over here on the side that say limit to help me be more specific in what I'm looking for. So maybe if I choose scholarly peer review, for example, it's going to make things more specific to that need, right? So prior to, or kind of as the students engage with this flipped video before they come into a library instruction session with me, they use the second handout and the packet of handouts I gave you that asks them to watch the video and ask them to think about the video as they're watching it, right? So treating it kind of like a text as well. What did you learn from it? What questions do you still have? And then also kind of prepping them for an instruction session where they are asked to pull out some key terms from their topic and to create at least one search similar to the search that they just saw created. The third handout is the handout they get in the session with me, for example. And what we do is we repeat the modeling that just happened in the video, perhaps the night or a few days before, where I take one of their topics and on the spot, I do the same thing they saw happen in the video with a topic in the class. And the students in the class help us all out about, well, that one looks interesting and this is why, how could we get more like that? So we do that, we do a search together, and then for the next, say, half hour, I ask them to use their topics and work through this worksheet. And you can see that it asks them to do 3 searches. And it asks them to do a search and stop and look at the screen and implement the techniques that we have seen in the video and that I have modeled in front of them as a class, and to make modifications to their search to get them to understand that the first search is not always the most effective search and that this is exploration and learning as they go, and to kind of justify why they are making changes. And so they do at least 3 searches in the class with me. And then we ask them to select one of those items and read it before the next time they come back to me for a more evaluative session. So the last handout, which is a KWL chart, which is the what I know, what I want to know, and what I learned, again, kind of connecting to prior knowledge, thinking about what do I already know about the topic of the article that I'm looking at, what do I want to get out of this article, so prepping them to read more closely, and then what I learned, and then also talking about what you've learned and what questions you still have. How is that going to move you into even more research? So how can an article you're reading contribute to the exploration of your topic as you go forward?
Yes, I think this goes along with, I can't remember who was talking about the research paper. Cindy, was it you, as more of a process than a product? And one of the things we've been studying in our PLC based on critical reading in higher education, a book that we've been using, is that, many of us end up with research papers that are not what we were expecting, right? And so how can we put more emphasis on research as a process rather than as a product? So, a little interjection there. And Eileen Shanahan.
All right. Yes, I'm Eileen Shanahan. I am in the Department of Curriculum Instruction and here to talk about some ideas about how we can use questioning to help our students really engage with and understand text and given text at a deeper level. So the purpose of this is to, and also I think this really builds on, Leslie, yes. Built on about helping our students basically move beyond this factual understanding of a text, right? The specific details about a basic summary, who, what, when, where, whatever, which doesn't really get our students to really understand a text at a deep level. And so we want to move beyond questions asking like, what does it mean? Which suggests that there is, first of all, a single hidden meaning that we need them to know. And think about how questioning can open students' ideas to think about the different interpretations that a text can elicit. So I want to think about critical questioning as a means to gain, like I said, these different interpretations, different perspectives about any given text so that they're doing more than just carrying away information about a given text. Also, this is on one of the a handout, if you saw. Okay. So we want to use questioning to help our students respond to text in ways that, one, while we want them to see that there can be different interpretations of a text, we also know that the whole, like, there's no wrong answers, I think, is a little off, right? Because there are some wrong answers, right? So they need to have some sort of verbal basis in the text, right? And we also want their questions and their responses to these to not be completely refuted by ideas in the text. So I'm going to go into, I have a whole list of examples and some things that we can do to help ourselves craft critical questions and also help our students do that. So these questions lead students to think about the relevance of the text to the larger world, the larger field with which you are having students read. So whether it's the time period, if you're history, whether it's the specific research about whatever issue it is, if you are maybe more of a science field or whatever it may be, these are some of the things that we want our students to think about. They can explore issues such as varying truths, presentations of reality and presentations of the data that we might have students read and encounter in any different texts. Any universal themes, if it's more of a literature thing, or universal or just big ideas, if it's more of a nonfiction text about the world around us. And any different viewpoints and perspectives, having them really critically question issues like race and gender and class and things like that, and how those issues might be present in a seemingly unbiased text, right, about scholarly research. So if you'll just look at this list of questions on the handout, the critical question examples, there's a whole long list of different examples, and so I've just chosen the first one. I don't think we're going to have time for the whole article that I had planned to look at about it, but what I want you to just be thinking about in your own given field, if you were to take a question like this very first one, how does a text help to contradict generally accepted truths? This might be something, none of these questions I don't think would apply to every text or possibly even every content area, but thinking about a question like this and use this to help our students guide their reading, to move beyond that factual understanding. So if we're giving them as instructors, giving them one question to be thinking about, and then have them even stop and mark places as you're reading about ideas that surprise you or ideas that might help you to understand this question. So then once they've finished reading and they've marked a whole bunch of places where ideas surprised them or were different or contradicted what they might have expected or thought to be true, then we can have students move beyond that and use those annotations and that writing to sort of create some sort of synthesis, create a response to this question based on the texts that they're reading. So thinking about how you might use this in your own classes, you can give students, take these are ones that I have found to be helpful in my own teaching. They're ones that I've modified or revised from others of my reading of other texts. You can give students questions, focus questions to guide their reading. You can give them, these focus questions can also help students move beyond that into larger discussions of the text. And they can also consider the significance or the pitfalls of the text using questions like these. And I think that with scaffolding and with over time, we can also have our students craft questions like these when we're having them. What are some of the big issues that you're noticing? Think about some of the questions that we've been talking about, some of those ideas, and how can you use those and build on those and ask questions of this text on your own. That's it.
All right, I'm the last person, so I'll try and keep it brief. A year ago, I used an OER book for Intro to Psychology, which is a free book. And one of the ancillaries that the book company provided were these things called reading anticipation guides, and I had never heard that before. So I looked at those, and actually the second sheet of my handout is one from their book. The book is called NOVA. And the idea of a reading anticipation guide is pretty simple. It's basically, and actually I learned it from the QEP people, that previewing the text, we've heard other people talk about previewing the text, is something that we all do, we've learned to do when we read text, but our students don't know that that's a huge advantage and kind of a trick. And so this is actually a way to get them to sort of preview the text a little bit. And so the idea is that you give them a table like this, and there are these statements that go along the bottom, along the side, and the idea is that the students will read these statements before they read the text. And then they have to say whether they agree or disagree. And then they read the text, and as they read the text, they'll find out if these things are actually right or wrong, these statements are true or false according to the text. And then they'll find out if what they said, I believed it or I didn't believe it, if they were right or wrong. And then they can ask them why they think they were right or wrong or not. And so it's really a simple little thing. It doesn't take them much time, but I think the magic in these things are in the statements. So again, this is the one I took from someone else created, but on the back side of the front page is one that I created for a reading for a class I taught. And this is a scholarly article. And so I read the article carefully, and then these statements are the ones that I thought would be previewing what the content of the article was going to be about, introducing them to the content beyond just what the title was, perhaps. B, I hope that they are, I wanted them to be somewhat intriguing, like weird. So the last one, Everybody Lies. Actually, that is something that the book, this article has some commentary on. So these should be things that are somewhat interesting, maybe controversial. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong. So it's both a preview of the content of the article, and as people have talked about already, it's the motivation piece as well, I think. I think if they can be controversial, thought-provoking statements, then they might be thinking, oh wait, how can this article talk about whether everybody lies? What, like, is that really going to be in this? And so they're thinking about this while they're reading, and the idea is that they would be filling this out as they read it in the last two columns. to try to, and I have them turn this in. And again, it doesn't take very long for them to do. It's not a lot of extra work on their part, and it's not very much work on my part either. Because I can look at these things and within, just a few minutes, figure out if they've actually taken it seriously or not. And it's really mostly in that last third column where they type these things out. Why were you right or why were you wrong? If they say things that are just cursory, then I give them some feedback. Hey, maybe you want to think more about this. But actually, again, I think it's the magic is all in the statements. If those are thought-provoking enough, they will be motivated to try and figure out where in the text does this happen. This is also a nice way to make sure they read maybe the entire text, because they know they have to get to the part where it talks about everybody lies, and they're like, I haven't gotten there yet. So it's got a lot of benefit kind of packed into a very simple structure, I thought. So again, I used it for my intro psych class last year, and then I used it for another class I taught, and it is a little upfront work. You got to read the text carefully yourself, figure out what those statements could be. So, but that was good for my critical reading of the text. So I'm reading it for that purpose. What would be an interesting statement to put on here for this text? So it made me read the text in a different way, which is nice. So it's a little bit of upfront work, but then after that, it's not too much work for the instructor. So unfortunately, the worst thing about them is the acronym. It's not a great acronym, but that's what we're stuck with. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, one of the goals of the QEP is to develop expertise across disciplines and across levels of the curriculum. So it's so wonderful to see folks from across the curriculum, but also people who are working at introductory level classes all the way through graduate level classes, and seeing the benefit of developing critical readers across all of those areas. And to build on the expertise that we have here at the university is also really exciting to be able to share ideas. So I also want to encourage you, and some of you all have already done this, is apply for quality enhancement plan leadership grants. I think Jill just sent out the announcement. It's in the EKU today. And so the deadline's November 1st, so a little bit of funding to support SOTL projects or other areas of research or your own learning about critical reading. So this was great, thanks again. So what questions do you all have, or follow-ups, or things you want to build on?
I had a question for Leslie. So what you talked about when students identify two aspects of the reading they don't understand, and they discuss why they didn't understand it, and then they pose a question to the author.
Mm-hmm.
So when they do that, like, what do you do with that information? Do you all discuss that in class, like with the students?
Right, and that
what
was
do you do
on
with
our
those
original,
responses?
on the first article that we did, because we were doing a pre and post project, and as far as the SOTL project, we did discuss that so they could kind of understand, because it was just kind of, we didn't prep them a lot for this, it was just kind of getting a baseline, and then part of our critical reading teaching was to go over this in class and see what answers people came up with. Yeah, and if anybody's interested, if you want to email me, Dr. Thompson and I actually did a modified version of the university's critical reading rubric, which we used to grade ours, to kind of guide that. But yeah, we did discuss it in class because that was a tool to teach them how to approach subsequent articles.
It's such a great question to get students to try to figure out what did cause me difficulty. Why was I having trouble reading this? And so spending time in class acknowledging difficulty, I think helps them see, like, it's not just me and I'm not just stupid, that I often share my difficulties with reading text in class and then the strategies that I use to approach that difficulty. So I think it's a really powerful activity or approach.
Well, I do have one other, just kind of a general comment. I teach, well, I'm Amber Shadling, by the way. I'm in apparel design and merchandising, but I teach a dress, appearance, and culture class, and every week I have them do a reading. Then we have questions related to it, and then some of the articles, they're all peer-reviewed, but some of them are a little bit easy to read, and then I start putting in the research articles, the harder things, and one of the strategies that I taught them is, well, I asked them, so how many of you guys have ever read something, and then you go back and you're like, what the hell did I just read? Because they don't remember it, they don't understand it, and especially when you get to some of those scholarly articles, the jargon is just way over their heads. So one of the things that I taught them, and I showed them how I do it, is not just going through and like underlining and highlighting, but for every paragraph, you summarize it in a sentence in your own words on the side. And so that caused them to actually stop and try to make sense of what the author was saying with these terms that they, didn't really know, and then define it, kind of in their own words. And I told them that's one of the strategies I use, that when I teach this class, I've taught it 4 times, so I don't go back and read the article every time, like, I don't have time to do that. So I go back and, look at my notes about, like, okay, this is what the article is, and like, yeah, I remember this part too. But they seem to really appreciate that. And I actually got comments on my end of the year survey about, like, she taught us how to read an article. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that was a thing that wasn't done, or you didn't know how.
Yeah.
So that in particular with my students has helped them.
Has anybody used Perusall? Have you heard of that? It's I guess it's a website where you can put any electronic document up on it's in the cloud, and then you can give anybody, your class reps, access to it, and people can make comments. It's kind of like putting it in the Google Drive. And so everyone has access to it, and people can make comments and see other people's comments. And you can actually insert questions in the text that the students will respond to. I don't think it has a grading function that you could say, it's kind of like embedding the questions into the videos, right? It's embedding questions into the text, and I've never tried it, but I'm aware of it. It's kind of like a social reading platform, so the students can be reading it either synchronously or asynchronously. It's called Perusall, or it's like Perusal, but with an extra L.
Any final question or comments? Thank you all so much for coming, and thanks to all our presenters.